A warm welcome to all of our chapter members and guests. Thank you for joining us for our October chapter meeting. I'm Catherine Spear, your chapter president, and on behalf of the chapter, we're very pleased to welcome Zoot Velasco, our speaker today, presenting a bold new study from the Gianneschi Center, as well as welcome our excellent sponsor, Mark DeBellis of West America Communication. I'll turn the gavel over to our chapter vice president and my partner today, Michelle Bignardi, to give our speaker introduction. Michelle?
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. So I'm really pleased to introduce Zoot today. Thriving through a recession. Starting in 2008, many nonprofits were struggling to keep up and survive the economic downturn. But a couple of nonprofits not only survived, they thrived despite the decline in giving and cutbacks within the public and private sector. What can we learn from those individuals? Zoot Velasco, former CEO of the Mihaylo Cultural Center, will share how he grew his organization 400% and raised $1 million endowment during the recession. He now studies how others do the same as the director of the Gianneschi Center for Nonprofits at Cal State Fullerton. Besides directing at the Gianneschi Center at Cal State Fullerton's Mihaylo College, Zoot is also a lecturer in business management, advanced social work, and organizations there. He also is the grant specialist for Mihaylo College. He lectures at Cal Poly, Pomona, with certified courses in nonprofit management, corporate and government leadership of design. And his books is textbooks, The First 100 Days, Leading Small Profits Out of the Wilderness. And he is the author of 2 books, a podcast, an event producer, consultant, and coach. Zoot holds a BA in dance from St. Mary's College in California, an MBA in nonprofit management from Hope International University, and professional designations in arts, education, fundraising. He's raised over $30 million for his organizations to date, and also leadership, management, and conflict resolution. I'm sure we're in for a very interesting presentation today, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Zoot.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. And thank you for having me, AFP. My old stomping grounds. When I was at the Muck, I was a member. I was here often. I'm a former CFRE, so I'm glad to be back. And I'm going to give you a little presentation about the research that we did over the summer, which was a project I was very excited about. And it's kind of what we can take from the last recession and apply it to the coming recession, because anyone who doesn't think we're in for a recession is fooling themselves after the economy we've had. So for those of you who don't know me personally, I had a 12-year career as a breakdancer, as all academics do, I'm sure. And then 23 years running organizations, arts organizations. I started running a prison arts program. I ran arts programs for the city of LA, city of Long Beach, some county-wide programs in juvenile halls, and ended up at the Mihaylo Cultural Center, where I paroled to from all my prison work, and spent 9 years running that program. I started 6 months before the recession hit with a 20% deficit. And during the recession, while most arts organizations were losing 20% or more a year, we actually grew by 400%, as it was said, and tripled our endowment. And a lot of people want to know how we did that. I started speaking about it. I ended up writing a book about it. And that book led me to a career in academia where it led me to an MBA program and then eventually starting programs at Cal State Long Beach, Cal Poly Pomona, and eventually taking over the Gianneschi Center. So the first thing I did when, sorry, somebody's not muted. There we go. Okay. The first thing I did when I got to the Gianneschi and realized that I had the opportunity to do some research is I wanted to see if the things that I did at the Muckenthaler during the recession that helped us grow, if that was common across the board. So I did a study of all the organizations who grew during the recession to see what we had in common. And it was a pretty comprehensive study because you can go to the next slide there. Not only did I study organizations in Orange County, but also the Inland Empire. So the information I'm going to present right now, as it says here, is only about small organizations growing, not about large organizations. So I just want to make that clear because I know a lot of you work with very large organizations, and this is really about how organizations grow from small to large. Okay. So the Great Recession, if you weren't around, and you don't remember it, we had a lot of problems. There was between 15 and 40% cuts in many sectors of our social sector, and you can see there was a huge loss in revenue. So that was kind of the backdrop for the study that I did. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit about what I studied. So as I said, I studied Orange County and the Inland Empire. So we're talking about 3 counties that when you put them together, look exactly like the United States. As if you take the Inland Empire and Orange County together, they look very much in demographics, in income, in red state, blue state, Republican, Democrat, urban, rural, very much like the United States. The only difference between these 3 counties as a group and the United States as a whole is that we have a slightly higher Asian population. Other than that, we're almost identical. So I wanted to study this as a microcosm for the US. And of course, across the US, 2/3 of organizations are under $50,000 a year budget, which means they do not have to file 990. And only 1/3 of organizations are over that 50,000. So that means that a very large percentage are under $200,000 a year. I think it's 72%. It's cut off there on the slide. I have to fix that. And that 72% of organizations make 3% of the budget. Whereas the organizations that are over $1 million a year in my study were 11%. And I studied every organization in the 3 counties. So 11% of organizations made 94% of the budget. However, 46% of the budget came from just 4 hospitals. And, you know, healthcare statewide and nationwide is about 65%. So you can see that healthcare eats up a large chunk of our budget. The groups that were between 200,000 and $1 million is that kind of category where they can really grow. And that group had 3% of the budget as well. So this was kind of the funding landscape that I was looking at when I did my study. There's 6,450 organizations in the entire area of 3 counties that brought in $13.5 billion. So that's with a B. So you can see that the actual fundraising income is a very small percentage of the total income. So if you want to go to the next slide there, Scott, thank you. So this is an infographic I put together that shows you a little bit about how the incomes kind of broke down during the recession. So of course, 2/3 of the organizations were stagnant or failing. 10% were losing more than 20% revenue. Then there was a group that was losing, more than or under 20% revenue. And there's this very small chunk of 207 organizations that grew by 100% or more. And those are the organizations I looked at. So if you go to the next slide, of that 209%, of the 209 organizations, only 29 of them were organizations that grew from small to large and were able to keep that growth going after the recession. Now, when I looked at the 209 organizations, they didn't have anything in common with the recession. In other words, they weren't there specifically for recession-oriented missions. They didn't have the same mission. We had everything from animal shelters, youth sports, after-school programs, housing. It was all over the map in terms of what they were, and 1/3 of them were faith-based. Next slide, please. So here's what really interested me is that of the 209 organizations that grew, 51% of them ended up shrinking back down to their pre-recession amounts by 2018. They weren't able to maintain that growth. And 14% of them even went out of business, went defunct entirely. So you're talking about 65% of the organizations that were not able to maintain that growth. So maybe they got a one-time stipend of money during the recession that helped them grow a lot, and then they were not able to maintain it. They ended up falling. There was 7% that were already large to begin with. And honestly, I was surprised it wasn't a larger group. I'm sorry that these slide looks a little different here than it does on my deck, but they've kind of gotten crossed there. But just so you know, 7% started as large organizations, and so they kind of had an advantage because they had staff in place. And I was actually surprised it wasn't a larger percentage. There were 14% that were very, very tiny and were able to grow, but not get larger than $1 million. So that was the 14% that kind of stayed small. But they continued to grow after the recession. They just never got over the $1 million mark. There were only 29 organizations that grew from small to large and sustained it after the recession. And those are the 29 that I studied in depth. Next. So if you're looking at those 29 organizations, here's the most surprising thing to me is that 3/4 of them grew from earned income only. They had no reliance on any fundraising other than earned income. 21% were social enterprise organizations where they grew from a social enterprise. 27% were entirely dependent on government contracts and grew because they were able to get more government contracts. A lot of times because other organizations in the area folded and they picked up the people that were left in the cold, and that increased their contracts. And sometimes they also got more governments involved in what they were doing. 21% grew from earned income fees. So for example, there was a pet shelter in Palm Springs that grew because they were able to grow their fees. There was a habitat in this category that grew their fees from their or sorry, not a habitat. That was a social enterprise. There were some other organizations that grew because youth soccer organizations that grew because they were able to bring in more parents and more fees. Only 31% of the people that grew were traditional funded organizations that had a variety of funding, like a Boys and Girls Club, etc. And those organizations also had a large segment of earned income amongst what they were doing. So the one thing I found was that to grow from small to large, earned income is very crucial. Next. So just to kind of bring this point home, the Urban Institute reported in 2014 that if you take that 50% and that 23%, which is the fees from goods and services from the government, meaning government contracts, you're talking about 73% nationally of income is earned income. And the funny thing about this is the reason that this statistics from 2014 is because after that, they took earned income out of their statistics altogether and changed it from revenue to charitable giving. And so you can't get the earned income statistics from the federal government anymore. You can only get it from the state. But in state statistics, it's still pretty much like this: between 65–70% of income is earned income. Okay, next slide. So we're going to take a break here in a second. Before we do, when we come back, I'm going to tell you a little bit of what we found from the data, what all these organizations had in common, the 29 who grew from small to large, what they all did that was in common. And we'll talk about how fundraisers and CFREs can help with earned income streams and some other things that you might be interested in finding out about.
Okay, well, as every month, we really do appreciate our sponsors. I mean, we couldn't keep it together without you, and it's deeply, deeply appreciated. So today, I would like to turn this over to Mark DeBellis, President of the Financial Services Team and Vice President of Marketing and Business Development for West America Communications. And thank you, Mark. And now it's time for you to share what you do.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you. We're going to say hi, and then we're going to go off camera. I'm Mark, and this is Madison. We're going to tag team our presentation here. We are very excited to be part of your meeting today and to be a sponsor. We're a unique company, and we've been engineered in a way that we believe will deliver a host of benefits to our customers. So things like results, quality, value, convenience, and speedy turnaround are often heard when describing our company's services. So I'd like to share this short video with you. It really does a great job of capturing all that in a very short manner here. So let me, here we go. So I'd like to introduce Madison now, who's going to share a little bit more about our company and our capabilities.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. So my name is Madison Dendy, and I'm an account manager at West America Communications. We are an Orange County original, as we've been serving the community since 1977. And today we have over 100 employees in our 2 locations. We're very proud of the unique business model we have created to provide you a comprehensive, affordable end-to-end solution. Our desire is to give our clients the resources to compete more effectively in a world that rewards speed to market, value, and high quality. So we feel we're unique as a service provider because we participate directly in the nonprofit and not-for-profit world. Today, we serve over 100 not-for-profit financial cooperatives with marketing services throughout the country. These credit unions look to us for marketing communication, promotional support, branding, and direct mail campaigns. We believe we may be one of the only service providers that conducts their own signature event in the nonprofit area. So we like to say that West America understands your world, and I'd like to share a little bit more about our own nonprofit that we serve. So if you're a mountain biker or mountain rider, you may have actually heard about Ride for Rwanda. It's actually now called the Good Dirt Ride, and what it is, it's a bike race ride between 10 to 75 miles, which supports donating heavy-duty bikes to impoverished coffee farmers in Rwanda to help them be more productive and earn more income for their families. Today, we're actually, these bikes are actually being sent to children in remote villages in Eritrea, South Africa, and Rwanda, so they're able to get schoolhouses to gain an education. So our CEO, Doug Grant, has been involved with this nonprofit from the beginning, as his love for biking, coffee, and helping others coincided. And Orange County's community, as you all know, is strong and giving, and we are so thankful for that, as we have generated approximately $1.2 million in support of this cause during its history. And this program has been a part of our West America company culture for the past 14 years. As we all know, it's been very difficult this year in 2020 to not have our annual event. I'm sure most of you feel the same way about your events as we wait and hope for things to return to normal. As a service company that also serves its own nonprofit initiative, we do uniquely understand many of the challenges you are all going through, and so we hope that we can bring a perspective to help to solve your marketing and communication challenges. So these next slide, we're going to be talking about our capabilities as a service provider. So we actually have 2 facilities, one in Lake Forest and the other in Irvine. Our main location is in Lake Forest and has our main printing, production, mail design, mail house design services, finishing, and shipping. Our second location is actually going to be in Irvine, and it houses our wide format display graphics operation. And there we produce materials such as event track graphics, trade show booths, banners, vehicle wraps, wall decals, I apologize, and so much more. So within both of our locations, we have a multitude of capabilities that we know can support your mission. And I'd just like to take it over to Mark to talk about some of the types of solutions we can support.
Thank you, Madison. We maintain a fully staffed creative team, and we can take as much control as you want over the project. So many of our clients have in-house creative support. So if you have an in-house art department, we may just walk alongside of you and assist you where needed. In other cases, we can take the project from beginning to end. So we pride ourselves on our flexibility. You can look to us for things like branding and logo design, help with the concept to design and layout. Lots of customers that are using more infographics today to simplify complex ideas. We're able to assist with those as well. And we have on-site photographic and video resources, as well as copywriting and translation services to help where necessary. For many of those in the nonprofit world, direct mail is a real key part of their fundraising, and we're happy to say we have a comprehensive resource right on site to help with creative and implementation of your direct mail campaigns. Our mail house is completely secure. You know, we work with so many financials. That part of our business is constantly under scrutiny, so we have an extremely high commitment and attention to your data and your security, and have a process that assures that it won't go anywhere but where it's supposed to. We can implement programs utilizing all types of popular formats, from appeal letters, postcards, self-mailers, newsletters, and even custom packages. Can even help you with list acquisition and data segmentation should you need it. Finally, we're third leg of the stool, if you will, is our collateral development and event marketing. We talked a little bit about our office in Irvine, and we can also help with annual reports, budget packets, and capability decks. Whichever tools you're using to tell your story would fall into our wheelhouse. So our capabilities run pretty wide, and we know that oftentimes in our world there's more opportunity than there is budget to meet it. So we're very happy to say that we find ourselves with the ability to deliver really high quality support at a very good value. We've been blessed to work with a number of notable clients in Orange County, and continue to look for new clients as well. So we are accepting new clients. And if you like what you've seen, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and let's chat and get to know each other even a little better. Again, thank you for the chance to sponsor this event, and wish all of you to be well and safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mark and Madison, for that wonderful presentation and for your support. And now we'd like to return the presentation to Zoot, Velasco and the rest of that riveting study out of the Gianneschi Center.
Thank you. That was really interesting, West America. I didn't know about all that stuff, so that's good to know. So before we had the break, I was giving you all the statistics from my study, and now I want to just kind of tell you what it all means. So I ended up interviewing as many as I could of the 29 recession stars, is what I'm calling them. These are people who grew from small to large during the recession, and find out what they all had in common. One thing that they had in common is that they all had some best practices in management and leadership. I'm going a little out of order there as number 3, that all of them had taken some kind of leadership courses. Either they came from the for-profit sector as managers, or in many cases, they took a course in their church if they came from a faith-based organization, or through 1OC or those kinds of organizations, and had some kind of a best practices of what good management and leadership is. And part of that is that they built other leaders. One of the biggest things that I noticed from all of them is that the first thing that they said, I think some people need to mute. You're getting a lot of feedback there. Thank you. One thing that they said is that there was the one thing that everyone said, very first thing that they said, if I said, what do you attribute your success to? Very first thing they said is a great network. And that within the network, they became connectors that built people to care about their organization, care about their mission, and become other leaders within the mission. That they weren't precious about, this is my organization, I'm in charge, we're going to do it. They made everybody that came into the organization another leader in the organization and another evangelist for the organization. And that was a really important thing that came up time and time again, is that they built this network of evangelists for their mission. The next is that they were very mission centric, that they didn't approach people asking about money for things. They approached people first saying, this is our mission, how can you help? And a lot of times that was in-kind donations, a lot of times that was contracts, that was other things that people could do to help them get their mission solved. And some of the people that started social enterprises, they weren't looking to start a social enterprise. It's just that's how they found they could serve their mission best. They all were really good at building these strategic partnerships and allies through their networks, because networking was key with everyone I talked to. And then making sure that they had innovative pilots that scale. So one of the things they had in common is that we're in the middle of a recession. They leveraged those opportunities of the crisis to create small pilot programs that would scale up and become bigger programs. So, you know, that is the definition of innovation. And then deepening those relationships they have in their networks to tell their story well, which led to funding, as well as growing their organizations, more in-kind donations, more funding, more contracts, etc. And that came up time and time again. So it was this idea, if you could go to the next slide, it was this idea of taking something small and growing it by being very mission centric. What I didn't see was a large focus on traditional fundraising, you know, looking at grants, major gifts. A lot of them were too small to get grants because they didn't have the proof of concept yet. They didn't have the track record yet to get a grant. Any focus on exterior help outside their community, they were really focused on developing their networks within whatever their community was. And for some, that community was national. For some of them, it was very localized. There wasn't any focus on self-produced events like galas. If any of them, the very few of them that had events, it was other people producing events on their behalf. So that was another key thing. And if you go to the next slide. You know, I'm sure if you are a fundraiser consultant like me, you'll get calls from people that will say, oh, you know, I've just lost this huge amount of my budget. I need to make about $200,000. You're a fundraiser, you can do that, right? I heard you're good. That's the kind of thing we get all the time, right? You can do this. I know you can get it. But what they don't realize is that it's not we don't have magic beans, right? We don't just come and magically wave a wand and money comes back to them. I think they think that sometimes when they hire us, but if you go to the next slide, what I find out a lot of times when I get these calls is what I call the pyramid of doom, where you have like a founder who's been kind of floundering through an organization that's very small, and they see a need, and then they're out looking for funding, and if they get the funding, they're going to do that need. But anytime somebody comes to help them, they often drive that person away because they're not doing it the way they want it done, and it's more about them than it is about the mission. So this is that small group or large group of small organizations that never seem to grow, and I see it over and over again when I to help them as a consultant. We're saying something like, have you thought about getting some free help from students, internships? Oh yeah, we've had some students come through here, but they didn't do it the way I wanted it done, so I let them all go. You know, we've all probably met people like this, right? So what these organizations that grew did, if you go to the next slide, is they did not the pyramid of doom, but the cycle of success, where they identified a need. Then they didn't start out by creating an organization. They started out by gathering a network of people that wanted to address the need. Then they would lead that need and lead that network, plan what they're going to do it, and a lot of that had to do with earned income streams. and then tell people about it. And through the telling, through the marketing, through the story, be able to attract funding, and through that funding grow small pilot programs that were innovative and create newer, bigger programs that address new needs, and then the cycle started all over again, but this time they were a little bit bigger. This is what I saw over and over again. So in my own training at the Gianneschi Center, we do a CEO training program for anyone who wants to be a leader of an organization. It's called the Gianneschi Fellowship for Social Impact Leadership. And we've changed that to address this model now. So we train in this model. If you go to the next slide, please. So how can you all as consultants help small organizations that want to grow? Well, the first thing is realize that they're not going to grow in the same way as large organizations do. What they need is coaching on how to network, how to build strategic partnerships, because every single one of the 29 recession stars I've talked to, they grew through partnerships and networking. Make everyone in the organization work as a fundraiser, no matter how small their staff is, that they have the fundraisers and you have to train them to do that. Make board members evangelists in the community for the mission, because a big part of it is that networking and getting the mission out and turn other people into leaders, including your board. Turning grants into contracts that small organizations aren't going to grants anyway because they don't have the track record unless it's a startup grant. But what they can do is, once they have proof of concept with these innovators that do pilot programs, is turn those into contracts. And like I said, over 20% of the organizations they talk to made 100% of their money from government contracts. And I have some really great stories about some of the organizations. I'm kind of dying to tell you individual organizations that are part of these 29 and their stories, because really every one of them is amazing. But I'll hold off on that for a second here. That they have this big attention to earned income streams, contracts, social enterprise, and fees for service were the three biggest areas, as I said. If you go to the next slide. So I teach in the business school at Cal State Fullerton, and one of the things that I teach for both for-profit business and for social sector is this idea of networking and filling structural holes. So if you don't know what a structural hole is, the idea is basically, let's say you live in a small town, and in that small town you have a Rotary Club, say, and a PTA and a church group, and none of them have any members in common. So they all work in silos. They might be trying to solve the same problems. They might be working on the same issues, but nobody would know it. But then you come along and you join the PTA and the Rotary Club and the church group, and now you are filling a structural hole that's making all three of the groups work together. Now they know what each other is doing, and by your presence there, you make all three groups stronger, and you make yourself more powerful in the community because you are filling the hole. So this idea that when somebody networks, not only do they make their network stronger, but they make themselves more powerful in the community, because they are the one filling the holes and knowing what's going on in all the different parts of the community. That's why networking is so important. And I run into people that say, oh, networking doesn't really matter. I joined a Rotary Club and I didn't get anything out of it. Or I joined AFP and I didn't get anything out of it. And the fact of the matter is, you probably didn't get anything out of it because you weren't that involved. And when you get involved, you find that you fill the structural holes and you get a lot out of it for the group and for yourself. So this is a concept that I teach in business. It's a business concept that for-profit people know about, that we should know about. And it's definitely one of the key factors for the success in the 29 that I studied. If you go to the next slide, please. So like I said, I changed the way I train to match that circle of success that I showed you earlier. And if you could go to the next slide. I want to tell you a little bit about the recession stars, a couple of them that were really key. But before I do that, I would be remiss if I didn't give you a little commercial for what we do at the Gianneschi Center. Just very quickly, We have a conversation coming up with Ken Wilcox on his new book on leadership. He's a Silicon Valley financier and tech finance leader. If you're interested in finding out more about this conversation on leadership from the book that he wrote, you can go to Eventbrite, and it is a G3X conversation. If you put that in Eventbrite, it should come up, or his name, it should come up. So you can find out about that more. And if you go to the next slide. We also have our fellowship program, which is a program on social impact leadership. It's for anyone who wants to get into a CEO role and find out what best practices of running an organization is. We have a new cohort that starts on December 7th. It's an 8-week program. It runs on Mondays on Zoom from 9 to noon. And scholarships are available from Orange County Community Foundation and SoCal Gas. That is $250 off if you qualify. If you want to find out more, you can get information on our website. We have other programs, including our work we do with the Orange County Community Foundation's Social Innovation Fund. We're part of the team that put that together. I do the pitch coaching for that as well. We have our podcast that we do, the 501c3 BS podcast. Our 5th season's coming up, but you can listen to all of the last season's podcasts. And we have our research project, which if you want to find out more about what I've spoke about today, it's on our website. I think Scott will send out a link to it. And we have a new book that I just got a book deal on this research that will be coming out in the spring called Small to Large from Kendall Hunt Publishing. So that's a little bit more about our programs. Just very quickly, some of the recession stars I studied, one of them was a group called Solidarity. It's a faith-based organization in South Fullerton that works with young people that were in need of jobs. They put together a social enterprise program, but really they just started out by putting together a network in the neighborhood. They found out that the summer camp programs were going to be canceled because of the recession. Those are programs that were put on by the parks. And so they got together a network to create a free summer camp. And they didn't charge anyone for it. It was all done by hook and by crook without any funding. But when they put that team together, that team ended up helping them put together a social enterprise business in t-shirts called Solid Tees, and eventually a coffee house called Solid Coffee. And they ended up being so successful with that, they had a $600,000 a year budget just coming out of the t-shirt shop, and they ended up selling that shop to the kids who run it, and now it's a for-profit business owned by the teenagers who are now in their 20s who started out running that business. Another great example is Cure de Shane. Cure de Shane is an organization who was founded by Debbie Miller when her son came down with this very rare form of muscular dystrophy called Duchenne's disease that debilitates 1 out of, I think it's 30,000 boys. And by the time they're teenagers, they're completely disabled, and they have very short lifespan. She put together a network of all the parents across the nation who suffer from this disease. They put together a fundraiser, started research, and ended up becoming a venture capitalist in research for this disease. Now they have a $5 million budget every year because they're actually investing in the research that they're funding. They're not just giving grants, but they're coming in as a venture investment. And so she's been able to leverage that into quite a large amount of money for what is a very rare disease and hard to for people to know about. So those are just 2 examples of some of the people who grew during this recession, the 29 recession stars. And with that, I'm open to any questions you may have.
Okay, well, please put your questions in the chat, and you really just answered the first questions about some examples, although if there's others that you'd like to share, I think there's some interest in knowing those examples. But I think the follow-up question was, are there some common features that make these successful and appealing?
So one of the key things that everyone said when I talked to them, before they said anything else, they said it was about their network, because every one of them basically were so mission focused that they developed this deep network. And this is an interesting thing, I think, for fundraisers to hear, because they weren't focused on fundraising. They were focused on their network, that they put together a network that would eventually help them with fundraising. So, you know, rather than starting with the idea of we got to fund this mission, they started with the idea, who will help me with this mission? And then the people helping them eventually would come up with ideas for funding. And a lot of that funding came after their initial projects that were unfunded. Another great example of one of the people that I studied was a guy from originally from the Philippines, lived in Riverside. He was a professor in the Philippines, and he became a dean a dean of psychology in the Philippines of a school, and his wife got cancer, and they had studied in America, and he had dual citizenship, and him and his wife came back to America to get her some help with her cancer. And while she was going through cancer treatment, he got a job as a social worker. And he eventually worked his way up very quickly because he had been this dean of a graduate school. He worked his way up to being the manager of the social workers at this agency. And he didn't think the agency did a very good job for their clients. He felt like there was a lot to be to be done still, and he thought that was across the sector in Riverside. And so he ended up taking some money that he made from the sale of a property while his wife was in her last throes of cancer, and he started his own nonprofit with his own money to start a counseling service. And his wife passed away at that point, and it was her wish kind of for him to really do this. So he started this counseling service, and the counseling service is called Creative Solutions in Riverside, by the way. And they ended up doing a lot more services for their clients than other services in the area. And so he got more clients that came over from other services. And as the recession hit, those other services went under, and he ended up with much larger contracts, because the way counseling services work is people come to you, and then the government pays you for each person you have. So the more people he got, the bigger his contracts got. And then he ended up with contracts in Orange County, San Bernardino, Ventura County. He ended up with 6 counties and expanding his business. And now he's, I think, $4 or $5 million a year. But he started with $450,000 from the sale of a property that he had. So that was another example of doing it through contracts. There was also a school called Del Sol School in Orange County that started out, it was her thesis, her master's thesis, to figure out a way to help people who were disabled get real education, not just be kind of sheltered. And she started a school for it with one school district school, and ended up doing the entire school district. Now she's in 5 school districts because they just have a better product than anyone else. And so other school districts came to her for help, and all of her money is through government contracts for each student that they have. And now they're, you know, doing very, very well, another $4 or $5 million a year organization. So that's just some examples of how people have done it through contracts. But I think the key to learn is that really, to grow from small to large, you've got to be very mission focused. Everyone has to be an evangelist and thinking about how they can develop their network, and then their network develops the funding.
Zoot, this is Catherine. I have another question for you. We all have heard the term networking. We all think we know what it means. So when we talk about effective networking, can you get a little more granular with that answer?
Yeah, so that kind of goes back to what I was saying about the structural holes. The people who were in the 29 that I studied, many of them were either presidents of other people's boards, they were on commissions with the city, they were very involved in networks across their community. And in some cases, like Cure Duchesne, her community was the entire nation, because she's dealing with a very, very rare disease and people across the nation. And she was able to get parents who were titans of industry to be part of her organization and her network and her board, and do fundraisers for her across the country. and using that then to develop the venture capitalist model for her disease. So, you know, it wasn't just that they showed up at a couple of meetings, it's that they were very involved in their networks, so much so that they became the structural holes that that kind of made their mission important throughout the city or throughout the community that they served.
And when you were doing your research, did you find that there were some commonalities when nonprofits kind of took on more traditional fundraising and failed? And if there were commonalities, what were they?
Well, I did find out that the majority of the people who got a big angel funder during the recession, that they didn't last. It didn't survive. So you know, a lot of times we get that question from funders: how are you going to sustain this after the grant? Only those organizations that really had a developed network survived. So I think the problem with thinking about fundraising from small organizations in the way that we do for large organizations is that large organizations have a developed network. Small organizations do not. So if you give them an offshoot of funding and they have no network, the funding's not going to last because they haven't developed the infrastructure to really develop that into more funding. The networking is the key that made the small organizations grow, because any little inflection of cash that they got into the organization was compounded by their network. So it was matched by others. You know, great example is Solidarity. When they started this t-shirt business, they had just some guy in the neighborhood who ran a print shop, and he said, hey, I have this old screen printing material. One time I was going to start a screen printing business and it didn't work out, but I'll teach you guys how to do it. If you want to run it, you can even use space in the back of my shop and you can run it from there and you can do it. So he gave them the tools to start something. But then what happened is they were able to leverage that with their network into workforce investment grants, into grants from faith-based organizations in their network. And now they're one of the key, they have an AmeriCorps grant. Now they're one of the key people in Fullerton that does workforce investment under many, many grants, because they were able to leverage this t-shirt business that was all in-kind donation. And that was because they had that network set up from the project they did earlier when they set up the summer camp. So what I tell small organizations is, if you focus on the network, if you focus on the funding, you might do well initially, but it's not going to last. But if you focus on the network, whatever funding you get will be leveraged. So you got to have that infrastructure there that large organizations have, and they don't think about that. They're just not thinking about it. I don't think most of us think about it. I don't think I thought about it as much until I did the study.
This has been such an interesting study, Zoot. I have another question for you here.
Sure.
Given our uncertain times, because we're talking about a post-recession model, given our uncertain times, what do you feel is the role of earned income going forward?
That's a great question, because obviously with COVID, many organizations, like arts organizations, are going to have a harder time doing their traditional earned income that they did from, let's say, ticket sales than they did in the past. However, and I think the word of the year for 2020 is pivot, right? Many arts organizations I've seen and non-arts organizations have done an amazing job pivoting to work their networks to create new earned income streams. And again, it goes back to that networking thing. So a great example of this is the Muckenthaler that I used to run. The new director, Farrell Hirsch, he had to shut down everything, as all arts organizations did. And one of his lead artists, who was one of my lead artists when I was there, Marcia Judd, said, hey, you know, we have all these old art supplies that are just going to go bad if they sit here for a year. What if we put them into arts kits with little lessons and gave them out in a drive-through to parents? You know, they've been sitting here long before COVID, so they're not infected. And we'll just give them out to parents, and they can take them home and do the art with their kids, because they all have to be teachers now at home. So they pivoted in this way, and they did 50 kits the first day, and they were gone in an hour. And so then they did 500 kits the next day. next week. And they went the first day, and eventually their funders and their network got and said, hey, let's do this for seniors. And Samueli Foundation said, hey, let's give you a grant to do this for seniors. All kinds of funders, because they were talking about it on their networks. And I got to confess, I gave money to it as well. All kinds of funders and just people who were listening to their emails gave them money, and they ended up making $40,000 on that. They got a PPP grant, and that together got them through the recession. And then they started doing drive-through concerts using their outdoor space and doing other kinds of programs that were in their cars. So they just figured out a way to do it. And it was really their network that made that work. If they didn't have the network, it wouldn't have mattered. So I think when it comes to earned income, we're just going to have to think of different ways that we can do. They say necessity is the mother of invention, but it's also the mother of opportunity. And there are different ways that you can do earned income if you have the network there in place. And that's the key thing. Word of the day for fundraisers is help smaller organizations develop their network in the way large organizations have a network.
See, thank you. It's such a timely study and such wonderful points taken. And I think it all falls under a great big rubric of what to do when everything changes. So a lot about agility, a lot about readiness. We really want to extend our warm appreciation to you for a wonderful presentation. Extend our thanks to Mark DeVillis and West America Communication for their sponsorship. Thank you all.